Soil preparation, when you put the wood chips down, they never compact. They're always soft. Every year I come out to my garden, all I need is my rake and just grade it out, make a little groove and plant my seeds. Because the air is always present, because it never compacts, it never has to be prepared. You come to a place where you've gardened, and your garden at the end of the year is all hard again. So you bring in this really nice organic material, fertilizer, manures, whatever. You till it in. You got this really fluffy, nice, aerated material. You're so happy. Oh, what a nice garden! You get out in your rake and you plant. Your stuff comes up. As the year progresses, when you get to the end of the growing season, that ground is right back to where you started. It's all compacted and hard again. And here's what happens. I use the example of a fire. To get a fire to go, you have to have 3 ingredients: ignition, fuel, and oxygen. In the soil, nitrogen is always present. That's the igniter. And when you bring in raw material, the fuel, and to get it there, air follows, it all burns up. You don't see smoke, but it all burns up.
There's a number of different ways to use the material. If you take the raw grindings and mix it in with your soil, it'll rob all the nitrogen out of the soil to rot the wood or rot the material. So you don't really want to do that.
So I tilled in these beautiful potato chip wood-colored orange wood chips into my garden last spring, and I wasn't too successful. My soil test says that I'm way down in nitrogen. Because I tilled those wood chips in, I tied up all the nitrogen in my soil. But now I know you never till this stuff. You just add to it, which was the mistake I made. So by getting the faith back and going back to what Paul has taught me, I think this is going to work because it just is simpler, right?
Basically what soil needs to survive is the same as this. It needs air, it needs water, and it needs food. It's a basic principle for all life. And so when you take mulch, for example, which is true in the forest, because there's not just one grade, like someone didn't go through and sift it and it wasn't always all coarse material or it wasn't all fine material. There's all what they have like macro pores. So there's all these different air pockets through the soil. And so what that does is it keeps the top part of the soil and even further down oxygenated. And so there's that oxygen available. The microbes and the earthworms come up into the soil, and then they can actually deal with that material and break it down. Normally when people think about mulch, they might think about what they call bark nuggets, which are just big chunks. It has to have different sizes of actual material. You have to have small grades, you got to have things like needles, you got to have things like chips. You can't have just one standardized size and expect that to do the same as what, I mean, if we look at what Paul's got here and I dig down, there's probably, I don't know how many different sizes of chips all the way down to what the finished product is, which is soil or organic material to the point where it's, I mean, that's what you're going for. Now, if I took and I multiplied this by a couple hundred times and that's what I was using, it would break down, but it would take a lot longer, and the ability right away for it to help out diminishes.
I started off with alderwood chips, which are kind of big potato chip sized chunks of wood. This has been here a year, and it hasn't broken down yet. So I don't think this is what Paul's talking about. It would have taken too long to break down.
And the other main thing that they're finding with a lot of different trees, grasses, plants, vegetables, compaction levels. A true healthy soil is not compacted, and when it does get compacted, it loses the oxygen, like those macro pores we were talking about. And you get an area where it becomes what they call anaerobic, which means the oxygen level is too low for the microorganisms to live.
We're dealing, as I said earlier, with compaction here on our farm, and certainly we're growing root crops to help alleviate that problem. What we're also doing is adding wood chips on top, knowing that they're going to break down slowly over time, create fines, and also work into this compacted soil. So it's kind of like a passive tilling almost that's occurring, which is a really exciting prospect to think that we don't need the heavy machinery or, you know, the heavy disturbance we can just keep adding and it'll work itself out.
I have used the raw grindings, and there's a number of people that do this, is just keep it on the surface. You're basically sheet composting, and it's more of a mulch than an additive to your soil. I have a tendency to compost between 10 months and a year. The compost itself, once it's composted, and then the screen material, you can use that several different ways. You can plant straight in it, which is, there's a lot of people that do that, or you can just leave it on the surface as a mulch. Compost does a lot of wonderful things besides just nutrient benefits in your soil, worms and beneficial fungus that's in there. You'll just see the plants just love it.
Fertilization, because of the compost material, every time it rains or you water, compost tea is being deposited into the soil, so you have a constant input of fertilization going on. Just not having a fertilized feature, to me, is just so amazing and such an incredible gift in this kind of stuff. And last year I had such an incredible experience, a real revelatory time. I had planted a row of spinach in the spring, and it came up really nice, and we enjoyed it. And I pulled it out and planted another one. It came up, the next one came up bigger and nicer than the one before. And then I was getting ready to pull it up, and one of my neighbors was talking about this black Spanish radish. It was so good, so I planted that for her. And that came up, and she couldn't believe the size and how beautiful that was. And I'm looking at this, and I'm just contemplating what's going on. And it says, now God, talk to me. Every time I planted in the same row this year, each one was bigger and nicer than the one before, and I didn't fertilize. This is so opposite of what my experience is in gardening. Whenever I planted something, something was taken out, I had to put something back. And here I'm putting nothing back, and each planting is bigger and nicer than the one before, you know. And I hear him say to me, it was so incredible, in Romans 1, he says, the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen by the things he's made, so that no one has any excuse not to know God. And so I just started taking it in and says, look, God, what invisible attribute are you showing me here? He took me to Philippians, where it says, and my God shall supply all your need, not from his riches, but according to his riches in Christ Jesus. And what he's saying there is that when he gives, he makes no deduction. He makes no withdrawal. He is the same. And he says this compost is illustrating that quality of my character. It gives, and it gives, and it gives. And there's no withdrawal. There's no negative. It just continually gives. And that's who I am.
These leaves are falling down, and the idea is they're feeding the soil back. So they're done. So at this state, the chlorophyll is going out of them because they're going dormant. They're going to drop these leaves that still have nutrients, and the reason they're changing color is that green chlorophyll is gone, the pigment. They drop down in, and they're feeding that soil, and they're mulching it by their own. I mean, we're not coming over here and taking the leaves off and mulching below them. And if we go over here, or we go out in the forest, they're doing the same thing. So, I mean, they've been developed over these eons to do it, and so, I mean, why question it? Obviously, that's what wants to happen. And when you go out, and someone might say, well, that's not true with grasses. You go out into a grass field, let's say the prairie of the Midwest, there was grasses that were over my head, but underneath it was mulch from the grass. You know what I mean? It wasn't just green living grass with nothing out. There was mulch, all those blades of grass that had broken down fed the grass. There's nobody that goes out there and fertilizes that. I mean, that's the thing that people always say, well, you got to have fertilizer. You have to fertilize. Or, I mean, if there is no out, you're not taking it away, you know, it's all going back. The animals were eating the grass, and it was still going back. So if you can recreate that in a garden, it's the same exact thing. The leaves come out, they do their purpose, they go back into the soil. It's really simplistic, and sometimes the most simplistic things are what people don't like to accept as being the answer.
Whenever you buy fertilizers, there'll be three numbers or three things that they're analyzing in the fertilizer. And it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is what gives the green, the good vigorous growth. The phosphorus is what creates the budding and the flowers and the fruit production. And the potassium is what gives hardiness and health and strength to resist disease. And all those things are important to be in the soil for the health of the plant. Chemical fertilizers, even though they have the numbers that say they're adequate in these features, do not have minerals, and so the plants that are growing without minerals don't have those in them, so they don't have the nutrient qualities that plants that grow in organic soil do.
The minerals simply aren't there in the soil anymore, and so it'll take up what it can get, but it isn't there to be gotten, and so you end up with a fruit or a vegetable or whatever it is that simply isn't as nutritious as as it once was when we had more fertile soils. Just the sort of calcium, magnesium, potassium, iodine, those kinds of things, the things that aren't fertilized typically, you know, as 30–40% reduction in what they were getting 50 years ago. That's pretty alarming, which is helps explain why food doesn't taste as good as it used to. It isn't as good as it used to. It's not as nutritious.
I always go to that scripture where God says it's good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. God's saying up front, if you're going to have anything of value, you've got to work for it. But he says if you do it the right way, you want to do it early on, do the work up front, and if you've done it right, over time, it'll produce for you. And this is what I think is so neat about the wood chips and God's way. You see, when they came with chemical fertilizers, they told the farmer, you can have this immediate lush growth now. And they were right. What they didn't tell you down the road using these chemical fertilizers, that every year you had to use more and more to get the same effect, and your ground eventually became sterile. When you use the organic approach up front, it's kind of a lot of work to bring in those wood chips because, you know, you got to cover the ground. It takes a lot of cover. But over time, what I found at my place is that you start having this incredible gain. Initially, you put a lot down, and you have to, you know, in a few years, you got to put it back again. But I'm finding that each time I put a layer on, it's a lot longer before I have to do it again because I have this incredible base built. And it's like you have a foundation that's just growing, you know, getting, you know, better and better. So over time, you're getting a higher and higher yield with less and less input, which is how it should be, because you get older, you have less energy, and you want to get return for your effort, and that's God's way. That's how he is. I love that scripture in this. It says, do not despise the days of small beginnings. You know, and I just encourage you to be patient. Nothing happens of any value quickly. Things that are of value take time. And the beauty of this process is that as time goes on, it just becomes more and more valuable. So, you know, if you don't expect miracles at first, because it's going to take a little bit of time. And as you plant things and you feel they're not doing as well as you'd like, then you can use fertilizers to supplement. Eventually you won't have to, but initially you might, and that's okay, because you've used them anyway before this, so you can continue to use them now. Good organic manures, if they're clean, work well. But as it goes, you'll find that you won't need to use those fertilizers, and you really have an investment that cannot be compared to what the rest of people are doing in dirt.
You got horses, you get horse manure, that's a given. Not too many constants in life, but that's one of them. You got to get rid of it. Okay, so what do? We clean the stalls, we take it out, we dump it in a pile. People want to use it for mulch. It has to be kind of a superior product. So what we do is we feed Eastern Western hay. It's professionally grown, and there's no weeds in it. And that's really important, because weeds, the weed seeds will go from hay, will go through a horse's body unhatched, undeveloped, and come out, and you'll get weeds. We use fir and hemlock shavings, so they decompose very rapid, as opposed to using cedar, which decomposes or doesn't, you know, very slow. And it's so simple, even I can do it. You just make a pile, and then I don't haul anything unless it's at least 6 months to a year old. In our garden up here, our experience has been you can plant right in it, you know, because it's chips that have dissolved, as well as the manure and so on. So we've had really good luck that way. It would not be good in the garden without being decomposed with something else, you know. That's a common complaint if you use straight horse manure. I'll go get some and show you a sample of it. You can see how there's no manure in there. It's all decomposed, and this is gradually decomposing also the same way. And as you use it, you'll notice that each year the soil gets better, you know. Especially if you, like Paul was saying, where you put down a ground up wood chips type thing and then cover with it. It makes a sustainable program. It's a recyclable thing, and then of course the vegetables or the flowers or whatever you have grow. They die for winter. You put more on. It's a circle type thing. Yeah, and it makes you feel kind of good, because ecologically it's pretty darn sound, you know.
Our culture is so wasteful, and so most people think, well, get rid of this wood chip stuff, get rid of it. You cut stuff in your yard and stuff. One of the things that you probably know about Paul now is that any waste out of his garden goes over into the chicken coop. or into the chicken pen. And then they eat it and munch it around and then poop. And then he brings that back over here and dresses the soil.
I think one of the most beneficial parts of a garden is to have chickens around, because there's such, I mean, the eggs are great, but you see they deal with all your waste, all of your yard waste, the expired stuff from the garden, my grass clippings, any weeds, all come to the chickens. And those are really nice organic products for them that they eat, and whatever they leave over turns into what we're going to be exposing here in a minute. They're out here all day long just kicking. You can see all those little grooves in here where they've been digging, and they're excavating. They're constantly picking seeds out, any bug kind of thing. So they're working this material. And as you're going to see shortly, I'll tell you, I've never seen compost so nice. This almost approaches topsoil. This is such beautiful stuff. Anyway, I'll just show you how easy it is to get. You can just see what beautiful stuff this is. I mean, look at this stuff. It just won't compact. I mean, this is the ultimate topsoil. And it's all just good compost from my yard waste. I always say that my chickens are my soil manufacturing plant. The eggs are just a bonus. Look at this beautiful fine stuff. There it is, pretty quick.
Somewhere down there's a soil, and that's good, you know, presumably the soil has been protected, and in the meantime it's been breaking down and getting a little bit richer with time. But this mulch that is on top is basically organic matter. And that's one of the things that we're losing out of our soils around the United States is organic matter. Organic matter is wonderful. It holds the moisture up there. It's like a sponge. It just holds it there and it just sits there. The plant can stick a little root hair in the water and it sucks it. It's just like a straw about this big around, you know, it just comes up real easy. And plus being in contact with that organic matter, it's got plenty of minerals, plenty of nutrients, lots of nitrogen and all that sort of thing.
It's quite interesting. People always ask me, well, wonder what your soil's like if they tested this. I said, well, I've never tested it. I've already seen where I came from. It's getting so much better that I've just been really happy with my results. But I think this is really neat. They did a soil testing and we were actually able to see that all this stuff, I mean, the soil completely is over the top as far as, you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which is what the plants have always indicated. But it's just nice to see that scientifically this, you know, meets the criteria. It's what it looks like. Every year in the same place I get a higher and better yield because the compost is being deposited into the soil via rain and water as a compost tea, and it's just like the soil is the bank, and it's a real descriptive of like compound interest. Just gets better and better and better, and the beauty is I do nothing.